Bionicle Adventure 7 Web of the Visorak. Written by Greg Farshty. Recording by Numbskill. Chapter 4. A pair of Visorak clung to a web high above the district of Le Metru. Any other creature would have been unable to see much of anything below, due to the thick vegetation and dense mist. But the keen eyes of the Visorak saw all that went on in the ruined streets of Metru Nui. The Earth Toa and the Air Toa had joined forces again, and were approaching the others. All to the good. The hunt would go faster if they were all together. The Visorak were about to send a signal through the web to summon others of their kind, when they spotted more movement in the streets. Vaki. Perhaps a dozen of them were now closing in on the Toa's location. This was a problem. Rudaka demanded that these Toa be brought to her, not necessarily alive. However, the Vaki would leave nothing, not even remains, to be presented to the Queen. In that case, her wrath would be terrible indeed. One of the Visorak set the web to vibrating, a message that would be picked up by its kind all over the district. All were instructed to monitor the Toa and the Vaki, and, if necessary, take action. How shocked the heroes of Metru Nui would be if they discovered the identities of the ones who would save their lives. Later on, of course, after they had met the Hordika, the Toa would probably wish they were dead. And who could say, perhaps if she were feeling generous, Rudaka might oblige them. "Vaki that talk?" asked Nuju, his voice heavy with disbelief. "And fire-destructive blasts? I think the strain is getting to you, Matau."
"I saw it too,"
said Wenua.
"They were ready to kill me."
"But they didn't," Vakama cut in. "And we don't have time to worry about Vaki. We have Matoran to save. If they get in our way, we will deal with them then." "If they get in our way?" snapped Matau. "They weren't throwing a happy surprise naming day for us back there." "Relax, Matau," said Onawa. "Did either one of you notice anything different about the Vaki? How they looked?" Matau shook his head immediately. Wenua thought for a long moment, and then said,
"Yes, there was something. I hardly noticed at the time, but there were marks on their skull casings. Scorch marks."
Onawa turned to the Toa of Air. "Where is the Central Task Force hive for Le Metru?" "Near the motor hub. Why?" "Let's go," said the Toa of Stone. "I think I know what happened here. And if I'm right, Vakama, getting the Matoran out of Metru Nui just became much more difficult." Matau tried not to look at the motor hub as the Toa drew closer to it. As Matoran, he had spent almost all his spare time there, watching the assemblers work or testing new vehicles on the track. Now a portion of the dome had caved in, and vines and creepers covered the outside walls. The surrounding grounds were littered with rubble and vehicle parts. For the first time, Matau considered that maybe the Matoran were lucky to have slept through all this. "Best not to think about it," said Nokama, as if she had read his mind. "I am hoping we won't have to go to Metru at all. I dread seeing what has become of my school and the great temple." Matau said nothing. He had already decided to limit his flying as much as possible. The less he saw of the new Metru Nui, the better. "Over here!" Onawa called. Matau and Nokama hurried to join the others at the remains of the Vaki Le Metru subdivision hive. Wenua tore the metal door off its hinges while the others braced for a possible attack. Nothing sprang out at them. Wenua used his mask to illuminate the interior. It was a tangled mess of wires leading to and from power cradles. When not on patrol, the Vaki rested in these frames and were recharged with energy from the power plant. "Shine the light over here," Onawa said as he began rummaging through the debris. My first clue was when you said you could understand what the Vaki were saying.
That's right, answered Winua. Everyone knows Vaki don't speak Matoran.
Correction. Everyone outside of Pometru thinks they know that, said Anawa. Remember, an Onamatoran may have designed the Vaki, but Pomatoran built them. The toe of stone fished a charred Vaki head and arm out of the rubble. Blown to pieces. I bet that happened to a lot of them. Otherwise, the city would be overrun already. He tossed the robot head to Winua. Vaki always spoke Matoran. They just spoke it at such a high pitch and speed that no one could understand them. When you said they were making sense, I knew something had happened that affected their speech centers. And maybe the rest of them too. Anawa bent down, grabbed one of the power cradles, and with a mighty heave, tore it loose. He dragged it out of the hive and dropped it at the feet of the Toa. The metal frame was scorched and partially melted. There, when Makuta overloaded the power plant, the feedback shot through the hives. Most of the Vaki were destroyed by it. The ones who weren't absorbed the energy surge and were changed. A half-dozen energy bolts sizzled through the air around the Toa Metru. The heroes scattered as the blasts tore holes in the hive. Right on the heels of the attack came the sight of 3 Nurok and 3 Kirok closing in on the location. Vakama raised his disc launcher, and Nuju his crystal spikes, ready to defend themselves. Matau slipped between them and forced their weapons down. "No!" he whispered. "I don't want Lemetru damage-scarred worse than it already has been. Hide in the moto hub. I have an idea." Running and hiding didn't sit well with any of Matau's comrades. But one of the most important parts of being a Toa was respecting the rights of another when in his metro. This was Matau's home, so it had to be his choice. Silently, the other 5 heroes vanished through a crack in the motohub wall. The Toa of Air triggered the power of his Mask of Illusion, transforming himself into a duplicate of a Vaki Rurzak. He was careful to make sure that the scorch marks Winnu had spotted were in the right place. Once the shape-shifting was done, he stepped boldly out to face the oncoming Order enforcers. The lead Nurok looked him up and down.
"Hive in subsection,"
it said. Matau thought fast. There is no time to waste on protocol. The intruders have escaped."
"Hive in subsection,"
the Vaki repeated. "I can tell you to which hive in subsection I will be going next. Yours, to report you for incompetence," Matau replied. "They were headed for Tametru. If we hurry, we can run them down." One of the Kirok stepped forward. "They were here? You saw them?" "Yes." "And you let them escape?" Too late, Matau realized he had walked into a trap. "Well, not really. You see, they were all ready." The Kirok turned to the Nurok, totally ignoring Matau. "A properly functioning Vaki does not allow a lawbreaker to escape. That unit is therefore not functioning properly. I recommend that its processes be completely shut down until repairs can be made." The Nurok nodded. All 6 Vaki raised their staffs, aimed them at the Vaki Matau, and prepared to execute their new command. Inside the motohub, the Toa Metru walked carefully among the debris. Winua had shut down his mask power so that the bright light would not attract the attention of the Vaki. Anawa stumbled on a piece of pipe and almost fell. "Rahi bones!" he cursed. "I'm guessing this place was a mess before the quake." "When did Pomatoran start caring about neatness?" asked Nuju. "When I started tripping over somebody else's junk," Anawa replied. "What's taking Matau so long?"
"He's probably in command of the squad by now," Winua chuckled. "And leading them too."
The Toa of Earth's voice trailed off. Nokama turned around to look at him. She could barely see Winua's outline in the dim light. He was facing the wall, examining something she could not make out.
"What is it?"
she asked.
"Look for yourself,"
answered Winua, shining a narrow beam of light onto the metal wall. Hanging from the ceiling was another web, but this one had an added feature that they had not seen before. A partially torn cocoon nestled in the center of the web.
"What do you think that held?"
asked Vakama.
"I don't know, but whatever it was, it got out,"
said Winua.
"And I would guess it is in here with us."
Matau did his best to ignore the stun staffs pointed his way. It had been his decision to send the Toametru into the Moto Hub, while he stayed here to lure the Vaki away. If it hadn't worked, well, at least he could still buy time for his friends to escape. He wondered if his form would immediately shift from Vaki to Toa if he was unconscious or dead. He hoped so. Otherwise, the Vaki might decide to disassemble their malfunctioning target right on the spot. The Vaki prepared to launch their energy bolts. Matau waited, eyes open, refusing to give them the satisfaction of showing any fear. Something caught his eye in the distance. He couldn't make it out clearly, but it seemed to be spinning through the air at a high altitude. As he watched, it dropped rapidly, headed for the Vaki. The object whirled in front of the Order Enforcers, striking each of their staffs in turn. Wherever it hit, acid burned through the tools, shearing them in half.
"What was that?"
wondered Matau, watching the spinning object soar away.
"And how can I get my hands on one?"
The Vaki whirled and immediately went into a defensive posture. Their optical receptors scanned the area, searching for whoever dared to interfere with their operations. Matau took advantage of their distraction to slip away into the Moto Hub. High above, the hard, cold eyes of the Visorak watched events unfold. The Vaki would move off to search for easier prey, while the Toa huddled in the Moto Hub, foolishly believing themselves to be safe. One of the creatures unleashed a second whirling sphere of energy, this time burning through an overhanging beam on the face of the Moto Hub. It crashed to the ground, bringing a ton of masonry with it, blocking the entrance through which the 6 heroes of Metru Nui had passed. Once that was done, a new signal was sent through the steel-like strands that shrouded the city, a summons not to be disobeyed. And the end of the Toa came crawling across 1,000 webs, a vast moving shadow that engulfed all in its path. Rahi fled at the sight, streaming out of Le Metru in a blind panic. Those who could not run burrowed beneath the wreckage of a ruined city and shivered in the darkness, one thought holding their hearts in a grip of fear. The Visorak, the stealers of life, were on the march once more. End of Chapter 4.